Hello everyone. This is a summary following the live video we did last week about food issues during the virus times. So this is just a very brief summary. There's lots more information in the live video that will be on the Reaching Families Facebook page from last week. So I'll quickly whiz through just some top tips on how to help with children that have difficulties eating in general, and then maybe things that are more kind of amplified during the virus. I'm Louisa. I'm a children's occupational therapist. I'm a registered SOS feeding therapist, and I'm a sensory integration advanced practitioner. So I have a few different kind of areas that support feeding, and most of my clients I work with are children that have moderate to severe difficulties eating. So my top tips would be basically for all children with feeding difficulties, would be to try to give the child as much control as possible. So whether you're in the shop or at home, trying to help them prepare foods with you, if you're having to offer new foods or alternative foods, really trying to show them what's available, give them lots of warning, and just really try to put your child in control as much as possible so they understand that things might be different. Whenever possible, I would advise to take things out of branded packaging and offer things in kind of Tupperware or just on plates, or to try to take away some of the kind of noise of the branding and try to let your child make decisions about new foods they might be having to consider just looking at the actual foods, not the kind of colourful packaging as well. One of the main things that we talked a lot about in the previous video, but again just really want to reinforce, is really trying to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. So as a parent or as a carer of a child that has difficulties eating, it's very, very stressful, and also this time about that we're in with the virus is also very, very stressful. So really just trying to be as gentle as possible with yourself, trying to make sure that you do anything that you can to help look after yourself and reduce your own anxiety, so you're able to support your child through their anxiety around food as well. Try to acknowledge that your child may have reached their tolerance for change. So they may be in a different school environment or at home. They may not be seeing the same people. They may just have so many changes in their routine in their life right now that they may have kind of reached their change tolerance. And so then also having to accept changes with food is just probably going to be just a bit too much for them. And so just trying to make things as predictable as possible. So whenever you know there's going to be a change to the type of foods that they're going to have, or any other kind of things that you can keep consistent, I would try to keep everything as consistent as possible with their routine. And if there is going to be changes, give them lots of warning. Try to keep meal times as consistent as possible, and just really keep that in the back of your mind about them having to tolerate so many different types of changes. How can we kind of reduce that load? And another thing I would advise is try to get your children as much full body movement as possible, so as much exercise as possible. There's just been new guidance released from the government that children with autism or learning disabilities or special needs can have more than one kind of exercise session a day. So if your child needs lots of movement, or even if you think they might not need lots of movement does reduce stress responses, and exercise does help us manage stress better. We know that from research and from just life. So as much movement as you can get your child as possible. And then try to, within your feeding routines, try to kind of slow things down. Try to eat alongside your child. Try to show that you're enjoying your food. Try to really, if you have different routines that maybe you didn't have as much time to eat with your children before, but they're at home more, try to really take that time as a learning time and really showing them about how you're eating your food and how you're enjoying your food, to be a really good role model for them during meal times. Another thing we talked about is trying to have 5 mini meals a day, so trying to reduce snacking in between meals, because this can negatively affect appetite, and really try to focus on having a little mini meal every kind of 2.5 to 3 hours. Obviously, this may take some time. If children are used to snacking every 10 minutes, then we want to maybe try to get them to snack every 11 minutes and then every 12 minutes. But we want to try to gradually stretch out those snack times, and then have a proper little mini meal every 2.5 to 3 hours. That would be 5 times a day. And then really try to offer as much variety as possible as you can during those meal times. So even foods that your child, or you assume your child probably won't eat, just give them a tiny little bit of a new food. So just constantly exposing them to a wide variety of new foods, at the same time always offering a preferred food at their mealtime. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of the top tips for helping a child with feeding difficulties through this virus time. But we go into much more detail on the longer live video. And then I'm going to go through a couple of questions that we didn't answer from the other day that came through on the chat. So someone asked a question about a child that puts whole mouthfuls in and doesn't chew. I think children that don't chew, sometimes they don't have the ability to, the kind of oral motor skills in their mouth, so they don't know how to move their tongue in certain ways, or manipulate the food inside their mouth effectively. And so it's a more immature reflex to be able to just push things to the back of our mouth and swallow, where you need more complex motor skills to be able to move food around inside your mouth, back and forth across your midline. So it may be that your child that's eating things without chewing just kind of doesn't know how to handle the food when they get in their mouth, so they just have this almost kind of habit of just kind of swallowing things down. And that to me does indicate some immature oral motor skills, and so you would need a kind of further assessment and some support on how to help your child develop their oral motor skills. Certainly things that we do with babies, like blah, 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 trying to get them to kind of copy funny faces and move their tongue in funny ways, chewing on kind of long toothbrushes or something where they're just having to kind of feel different things in the back of their mouth. Are first things to develop oral motor skills. And you can also just Google developing oral motor skills for some ideas for activities, but I would look at a further assessment for those children that are eating without chewing properly. Someone else asks, lots of really, really great questions, by the way, so thank you for sending these in. Someone else asked a question about whether there are any good foods to try introducing. And I would say as wide of a variety of food that you're already eating, that things are already prepared and ready to go, that are going on your plate or your children's plate, I would just keep exposing and keep offering those foods that your child is seeing other people in their family eating. So try not to put too much extra work on yourself. And then you can just give them the tiniest bit of, like, a half of a piece of pasta if they won't eat pasta, just offering tiny things. But there's a kind of more in-depth science to how to know what the best foods to offer is for children. There's more detail than I have time to go into. That kind of would be something you'd go into in feeding therapy. But we would look at the types of foods that your child's able to accept. So if they're able to accept just purees and drinks, or if they're able to accept kind of bite and dissolve, like Pringles snacks type things, then we would look at which level of food they're able to accept, and we would try to first try to maybe expand that level, because we know that they are able to manage those types of foods. Whether they can manage them from a sensory perspective is another piece of the puzzle. But obviously that's a bit more of a complex intervention. And so to start with, I think just offer as many different kinds of foods as your child sees other people eating, just the tiniest bit, however they can tolerate just looking at it or touching it or smelling it or being in the same room with it or having it on their table or picking it up. But know that there is kind of a more in-depth science to that, but that's a very good question. The other question we had that we didn't answer is about a child that stuffs food in his mouth and doesn't know when to stop. So again, he may not have good kind of sensation or awareness on the inside of his mouth to know when there is enough food in there, or he may also have kind of sensory difficulties where he needs a lot of food in his mouth to even know that there's something in there. So to me that indicates a sensory processing difficulty and potentially an oral motor skill difficulty that would require some therapeutic intervention. But maybe you can help him by first even having a mirror in front of him, or kind of showing how big of a bite he might be able to handle, and then trying to kind of slow meal times down and really do a little bit of teaching where you say, okay, can you feel it in your mouth? Okay, you've got that, you've got that pasta in your mouth. Can you feel that that's enough? Really trying to do some teaching around helping him develop that awareness. But yeah, that's a very good question. It's a very, very common thing to happen. There is one more question that talks about a child that is obsessed with ketchup and wanting things after every mouthful. I think it's a really good step that you said you started to put a little bit on a bowl and she's accepting just having smaller and smaller amounts. I think gradually reducing the amount that you put in her little bowl. I think that's a very good strategy. And again, trying to widen the different types of ketchup that she would accept and trying to widen the variety of flavors that she needs to accept, because that helps build new pathways in her brain, so she'd be able to accept more different types of foods. You said that your child has to have a baby wipe after each mouthful and wipe her hands and face. I think that is a sensory response, so she's having trouble with the feeling of the food on her hands and mouth, which again is very, very common with children that have difficulties eating. I would say leave her in control and just let her do that for now. I think later you can work through with kind of a sensory therapist, or some kind of like reducing tactile defensiveness is what you would Google. So you'd work on her being able to tolerate a little bit of mess on her skin. But I think you would do that out of meal times for now, and just let her be in control and keep her face and hands clean for now. I think that would be the best strategy. I think reducing anxiety around meal times is always the major priority. And then working on something within a therapeutic setting outside of that. So I think that's all of our questions that we didn't cover. And yes, just a few bits of signposting. If you would like any more information, you can look on my Facebook page, which is Sensory Children. That's going to show up backwards. But if you Google if you put in Sensory Children on Facebook, I have lots of free links and advice and tips and links to research. So you can go through my Facebook page and look at that. That's my company. Also, the SOS approach to feeding is, again, sorry, that's backwards. That is the body that's registered me as a feeding therapist, and they have lots and lots and lots of resources for parents. They have a kind of small monthly membership that you can join and get lots of feeding resources. I think it's only about £5 or £10 or something. So that's a lovely organisation to kind of be on the lookout for. Also, there is a wonderful book. It is this one, if you want to take a screenshot. It's called Food Refusal and Avoidant Eating in Children, including those with autism spectrum conditions. And it's by Gillian Harris and Elizabeth Shea. So that's backwards, I'm sorry, but that's Gillian Harris, Harris, and Elizabeth Shea, Shea. So that's Food Refusal and Avoidant Eating in Children. That's a brilliant, brilliant book. You can get a copy on Amazon. I got mine used. And I'm trying to think if there's any other. Oh, and there's also a charity called Feeding Matters, so feedingmatters.org. And they have brilliant resources. They have some free support to parents. They have peer-to-peer, so you can be paired with another parent, and they will offer you kind of free guidance and support. I can't recommend Feeding Matters enough. I don't have a visual of theirs, but if you just Google Feeding Matters, that's a brilliant charity. And yes, everyone, just look after yourselves and stay well, and know that these times aren't going to last forever. So I think just trying to keep your anxiety levels low and be as reassuring as possible with your child, and having as much fun with food if you can, and just really try to reduce those stress responses in yourself and your children in whichever ways possible. And yes, best of luck. Okay, thanks. Bye.